November 12, 2025, 8:30 p.m. local time, Caribbean Sea. A shadow emerges from the darkness. 100,000 tons of American power. The USS Gerald R, the world's most advanced aircraft carrier, slicing through black water. At 20 knots, deck lights blacked out, radar emissions reduced. Silent, unstoppable. This is the largest U.S. naval presence in Latin America since the Cold War. 90 miles south, on the Venezuelan coast, aging radar screens flicker. A single contact appears. The operators stare at the blip. Their system reads it as one lone destroyer. One ship, vulnerable, isolated. Venezuela scrambles 6 fast attack boats. 35 knots, arrowhead formation, driving straight toward what they think is an easy target, but they're wrong. What Venezuela sees as one destroyer is actually a full carrier strike group. Destroyers, cruisers, Seahawk helicopters, F/A-18 Super Hornets, over 15,000 U.S. personnel. And Venezuela just drove their patrol boats straight into a trap. What happens next will define the Caribbean crisis of 2025. A radar mistake, a 1,000-yard standoff, and a moment where one side blinked and the other did in single quotes T. This is the night. Venezuela challenged the USS Gerald R. and learned why you never mistake a carrier for a destroyer. To understand this confrontation, you need to understand what brought the Ford here in the first place. August 2025. President Trump launches what he calls a counter-narcotics campaign in the Caribbean. But this isn't a normal drug interdiction operation. 8 warships, a nuclear submarine, 10,000 troops, F-35 stealth fighters in Puerto Rico, MQ-9 Reaper drones conducting surveillance. And then, the killing starts. September 2nd, a speedboat leaves Venezuela's coast. U.S. intelligence tracks it. No warning, no boarding, just a precision strike. 11 dead. Trump releases the footage on Truth Social. Please let this serve as notice to anybody even thinking about bringing drugs into the United States of America. Beware. By November, 7 to 6 people are dead. No arrests, no trials, just strikes in international waters. Venezuela sees what's coming. President Nicolas Maduro accuses Trump of fabricating a new eternal war. He mobilizes to 100,000 troops, places the entire military on maximum alert, and then, on November 1st, the Pentagon makes its move. The USS Gerald R carrier strike group is ordered to the Caribbean. Destination, Venezuela. The Ford begins its transit, 8,000 kilometers, across the Atlantic, through the Caribbean, straight toward Venezuelan waters. On November 12th, at 8:30 p.m., the Ford enters the Caribbean darkness. And Venezuela's coastal radar picks it up. But the radar is wrong, catastrophically wrong. And that mistake is about to escalate into the most dangerous naval confrontation in the Western Hemisphere in decades. 8:30 p.m., the Ford strike group enters Venezuelan radar range. Inside Venezuela's coastal command center, operators stare at their screens. The JY-1B radar, a Chinese-made system from the 1980s, shows a single contact. One ship, 90 nautical miles north of La Guaira. The system can't discriminate. It compresses the entire carrier strike group, the Ford, to destroyers, a guided missile cruiser, helicopters into one blip. The commanders see the contact. They make a decision. 6 fast attack boats are scrambled. Objective, intercept the American ship, pressure it, force it to alter course, turn the encounter into a political victory. The boats launch at full speed, 35 knots, arrowhead formation, 1 lead boat, 2 pairs flanking it, all driving toward the Ford's projected track. They believe they're hunting one isolated destroyer. In reality, they're racing toward the most powerful naval formation on Earth. 8:45 p.m., the Americans detect the threat. On the bridge of the USS Gerald R. Radar operators watch 6 small contacts appear on their screens. At first, they look like routine coastal traffic. Then, the contacts tighten. Their tracks bend inward. The movement is unmistakable. They're not patrolling. They're converging. The Venezuelan boats form a perfect arrowhead. Speed, 35 knots. Bearing, straight toward the Ford's bow, inside the Ford's Combat Information Center. The tactical picture hardens. These aren't fishermen. This is attack geometry. The Venezuelan boats cross the 20 nautical mile mark, the 15 nautical mile mark, 10 nautical miles. They're not slowing down, and they're not breaking formation. The USS Thomas Hudner takes position. The USS Thomas Hudner, an Arleigh Burke-class destroyer, receives orders. Move into blocking position. The Hudner's turbines push. The bow tilts. The destroyer slides into a new trajectory, cutting across the Venezuelan intercept line. This is a textbook soft block. No aggression, no provocation, but absolutely firm. The Hudner plants itself between the incoming boats and the carrier. The message is clear. You want the fort? You go through us first. Above the formation, two MH-60 or Seahawk helicopters lift into the night. Their infrared sensors lock onto the Venezuelan boats. Every movement, every speed spike, every wake pattern, nothing approaching the strike group will go unseen. But the Venezuelan boats don't slow. They don't widen. They don't hesitate. They tighten their formation and push toward 40 knots, 5 nautical miles. The gray zone. The distance collapses. 5 nautical miles, then 3, then 1,000 yards. This is what sailors call the gray zone. The space where reactions must be instantaneous, where small mistakes trigger massive consequences. On the Hudner, the Mark 45 gun rotates, slow, deliberate. It settles just a few degrees toward the incoming wakes. It's not aimed, but it's not idle either. The phalanx CIWS shifts into passive tracking. The white dome makes short, economical sweeps. It looks calm, but it can respond in seconds. Above, the Seahawks tighten their orbit. Their infrared pods cut through the dark water like spotlights that never blink. And then, at 1,000 yards, it happens. A fire control radar pulse lights up the Hudner's forward section. Not long enough to trigger alarms, but unmistakable to anyone who's ever worked the naval. Watch, the Venezuelan boats just locked a targeting radar onto a U.S. warship. Is the technical equivalent of placing a finger on a trigger without pulling it. Non-lethal, but dangerously intimate. The U.S. response, total discipline, and yet the American posture doesn't change. The gun stays angled, not aimed. The CIWS stays passive, not aggressive. The Seahawks stay overhead, steady and disciplined, and the fort continues on its original heading, unmoved. The U.S. Strike Group broadcasts a formal message on the International Hailing Channel. This is U.S. Naval Forces operating lawfully in international waters. We are maintaining course and speed. Request all vessels maintain safe distance per international maritime law. Clear, calm, precise. And then, silence. The Venezuelan boats don't respond. No acknowledgement, no challenge, no explanation. Just silence. And they keep coming. The decision point. Inside the Venezuelan boats. Reality is setting in. The crew realizes they're not facing one destroyer. They're facing an entire carrier strike group. The formation begins to waver. Bow angles shift by fractions of a degree. Wakes widen. The once rigid arrowhead starts to crack, and then the speed signatures change. 30 knots, 25, 20, 18. The Venezuelan boats slow down. From above, the Seahawks record the transition with clinical clarity. Wakes shorten. Bow waves diminish. The compressed formation begins to relax outward. It's not tactical maneuvering. It's a force stepping back from the edge, and in perfect contrast. The U.S. formation does nothing. The Hudner holds its screen. The carrier maintains speed. The radio stays silent. Every ship remains locked on its original heading. The Venezuelan patrol craft had driven themselves to the brink, but the gray zone forced the decision they had hoped to avoid. Venezuela blinked. Washington didn't. As the Venezuelan boats bled down to 18 knots, the arrowhead collapsed. The rigid angle softened into wider arcs that drifted outward from the air. The Seahawks captured every movement. Each boat turned a few degrees toward the coastline, slow enough to mimic routine patrolling, but precise enough to reveal a deliberate step back. The American formation didn't shift a fraction of a degree. The USS Gerald R forward held its 20-knot advance as if nothing had happened at all. No radio acknowledgement, no celebration, no change in posture. The U.S. strategy had been built on discipline, and that same discipline defined the end. By the time the patrol boats settled onto a heading toward Venezuelan waters, the confrontation was over. No collision, no warning shots, not even a raised voice over the radio. The American formation continued exactly as it had before the intercept ever began, untouched, unaltered. But the implications are massive. What this means for Venezuela wasn't just a radar mistake. It was a strategic disaster. Venezuela mobilized 100,000 troops. They activated coastal missile batteries. They scrambled their air force. And when the moment came to confront the U.S. Navy, they backed down. Maduro's government can spin this however they want, but the reality is undeniable. Venezuela challenged the USS Gerald R, and they lost. What this means for the region: Colombia is watching. Brazil is watching. Every Caribbean nation is watching. The message is clear. The U.S. Navy doesn't yield in international waters. And if you misread a radar screen and drive 6 boats toward a carrier strike group, you're going to regret it. What this means for global naval power: this encounter revealed something that raw firepower alone can't demonstrate. American strength at sea lives in presence, composure, and the ability to manage danger without letting it dictate the outcome. The Ford didn't fire a shot, but it didn't need to. Discipline won. Geometry won. Resolve won. And the world took notice. November 12, 2025. A night in the Caribbean. 2 forces faced off in the darkness. On one side, 6 Venezuelan fast attack boats, driven by a radar mistake, convinced they were chasing one isolated destroyer. On the other side, the USS Gerald R, the world's most powerful warship, backed by destroyers, helicopters, and 15,000 personnel. The Venezuelan boats drove themselves to the edge. Fire control radar locked. 1,000 yards, the gray zone. And then they blinked. Because in naval warfare, it's not about who's faster. It's not about who's louder. It's about who holds the line when the distance collapses to seconds rather than minutes. The Ford held its course. The Hudner held its screen. The Seahawks held their orbit. And Venezuela backed down. No shots fired. No casualties. No escalation. Just pure, disciplined resolve. But here's the question that lingers. If a single radar misread drove the Venezuelan boats this far into danger tonight, how far might the next misunderstanding push them? And what happens when the margin for error is even smaller? Right now, the USS Gerald R continues its patrol in the Caribbean. Venezuela's forces remain on alert, and the standoff, though paused, is far from over, because this wasn't the end. It was a warning, and the next time Venezuela sees a contact on their radar, they'll think twice before scrambling their boats. This is the story of the night Venezuela challenged the USS Gerald R and learned why you never, ever mistake a carrier for a destroyer.